The hook. Sometimes the most extraordinary people walk among us disguised as ordinary tourists, carrying secrets that could save lives. What happens when a peaceful vacation becomes a life-or-death situation? And the quiet woman in the corner booth suddenly becomes everyone's only hope for survival. This is the true story of how assumptions can be deadly wrong, and how heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of San Miguel, a picturesque mountain town nestled in the Colombian Andes. Maria Santos adjusted her simple cotton dress and checked her tourist map one more time, playing her part perfectly. To everyone around her, she appeared to be just another middle-aged woman from the city, perhaps a teacher or office worker, taking a well-deserved vacation in the mountains. Her graying hair was pulled back in a modest bun. Her clothes were unremarkable, and she carried herself with a slightly uncertain gait of someone unfamiliar with mountain terrain. What the locals didn't know was that Maria had spent the last 15 years as one of Colombia's most skilled combat pilots, flying dangerous missions over rebel-controlled territories and drug cartel strongholds. Her hands, which now gently turned the pages of a guidebook, had guided fighter jets through hostile airspace. Her eyes, which seemed to casually observe the mountain scenery, were trained to spot threats from thousands of feet above ground. But today she was simply Maria the tourist, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The small town of San Miguel had become a popular destination for weekend visitors from Bogotá and Medellín. Its colonial architecture, colorful markets, and breathtaking mountain views attracted hundreds of tourists each month. The town's economy had flourished with this new attention, and locals had embraced their role as hosts to city dwellers seeking escape from urban life. Hotels, restaurants, and souvenir shops lined the main square, all catering to visitors like Maria, who came seeking peace and simplicity. Maria had chosen San Miguel specifically because it was off the beaten path for military personnel. She needed this break from her high-stress career, away from the constant tension of combat readiness and the weight of life and death decisions. For 3 days, she had successfully blended in with other tourists, visiting the local church, browsing handicraft stalls, and enjoying quiet meals at sidewalk cafes. Nobody suspected that the woman ordering coffee and pastries had spent her career defending their country from the sky. The town's main hotel, Casa Montana, sat on a small hill overlooking the central plaza. Maria had booked a simple room there, nothing fancy, just clean sheets and a window facing the mountains. The hotel's owner, Carlos Mendez, was a friendly man in his 60s who had converted his family's colonial home into a guest house after recognizing the potential of tourism. His wife, Elena, managed the kitchen and treated guests like family members. Their teenage daughter, Sophia, helped with cleaning and often practiced her English with foreign visitors. On this particular Tuesday morning, the hotel hosted an eclectic mix of guests. There was James Patterson, a retired American engineer exploring South America with his wife Dorothy. They were the typical elderly tourists, always wearing matching hiking boots and carrying an impressive collection of cameras and guidebooks. A young German couple, Hans and Greta, were backpacking through Colombia as part of a year-long journey across South America. They spoke enthusiastic broken Spanish and documented everything on their smartphones. 3 Colombian families from Medellín had come for a short vacation, their children running around the hotel courtyard and adding cheerful noise to the peaceful atmosphere. Maria observed her fellow guests with the trained eye of someone accustomed to assessing people quickly and accurately. The American couple seemed harmless enough, though James had the confident bearing of someone used to being in charge. The German backpackers were clearly more interested in their social media presence than in genuine cultural exchange, but they were friendly and respectful. The Colombian families appear to be exactly what they seemed. Urban professionals taking their children to experience rural life and traditional culture. The morning passed peacefully. Maria joined other guests for breakfast in the hotel's small dining room, where Elena served fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, and strong Colombian coffee. Conversation was light and pleasant, focused on plans for the day and recommendations for local attractions. James Patterson dominated much of the discussion, sharing stories from his travels and offering unsolicited advice about photography techniques and hiking routes. His wife, Dorothy, smiled patiently and occasionally redirected his more lengthy monologues. After breakfast, most guests dispersed to explore the town or embark on planned excursions. Maria decided to visit the local museum, a small collection of artifacts and photographs documenting the region's history. The museum occupied 2 rooms in a colonial building near the church, and the elderly curator, Don Roberto, was delighted to have a visitor genuinely interested in his displays. He spent nearly an hour explaining the significance of various indigenous artifacts and sharing stories about the town's founding in the late 1600s. From the museum, Maria walked to the town's small market, where vendors sold fresh produce, handmade textiles, and local crafts. She purchased a beautiful woven scarf as a gift for her sister and chatted briefly with a vendor, a middle-aged woman named Carmen who had been weaving for over 30 years. Carmen complimented Maria's Spanish, assuming she was from another region of Colombia rather than recognizing her as a local. This pleased Maria, as it confirmed she was successfully maintaining her tourist persona. The afternoon grew warm, and Maria decided to return to the hotel for a rest before dinner. The lobby was quiet, with most guests still out exploring or napping in their rooms. Carlos was behind the front desk, updating reservation records in a large handwritten ledger. They exchanged pleasantries about the beautiful weather and Maria's morning adventures. Carlos recommended a small restaurant near the plaza for dinner, known for its traditional mountain cuisine and reasonable prices. As Maria climbed the wooden stairs to her second-floor room, she noticed the German couple returning from what appeared to be an extensive hiking expedition. They were dusty, tired, and carrying backpacks loaded with water bottles and camera equipment. Greta looked somewhat distressed, and Hans was speaking to her in rapid German while gesturing toward his phone. Maria's training kicked in automatically, and she found herself listening carefully to their conversation, even though she couldn't understand the language. Something in their body language suggested they had encountered more than just difficult terrain during their hike. In her room, Maria kicked off her walking shoes and lay down on the simple bed, finally allowing herself to relax completely. The room was sparse but comfortable, with whitewashed walls, a small wooden desk, and a window that framed a perfect view of the surrounding mountains. She had left her military life behind for these few days, but old habits died hard. Even in this peaceful setting, part of her mind remained alert, processing the subtle details of her environment and the behavior of people around her. The late afternoon sun streamed through her window, and Maria dozed lightly, the kind of rest that military training had taught her to take whenever possible. She dreamed of flying, as she often did, but these were peaceful dreams of soaring over mountains rather than the intense combat scenarios that usually haunted her sleep. The sound of children laughing in the courtyard below provided a soothing backdrop to her rest. She was awakened around 5 o'clock by raised voices from somewhere in the hotel. At first, she dismissed it as typical tourist excitement or perhaps children playing too enthusiastically. But her trained ear detected an edge of urgency that made her sit up and listen more carefully. The voices were coming from downstairs, and they seemed to be speaking in Spanish with accents she couldn't immediately identify. Maria moved quietly to her window and peered down at the hotel courtyard. She could see several people gathered near the entrance, but the angle made it difficult to determine what was happening. The voices continued, and she began to make out individual words. Someone was asking about guests, specifically about who was staying in the hotel and where they were from. The tone was not friendly or casual, and Maria felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that preceded dangerous situations. Her military training took over completely now. Moving silently, she positioned herself where she could see the hotel's main entrance while remaining hidden from view. What she saw made her blood run cold. Three men in civilian clothes were talking to Carlos at the front desk. They looked like locals, but something about their posture and the way they positioned themselves suggested they were not ordinary townspeople. One man stood near the door, effectively blocking the exit, while another had moved to a position where he could observe the staircase. The third man, apparently their leader, was questioning Carlos intensively. Maria couldn't hear the entire conversation from her position, but she caught enough fragments to understand the situation was serious. The men were asking about foreign guests, specifically Americans and Europeans. They wanted to know room numbers, how many people, and what their plans were. Carlos appeared nervous, but was trying to be cooperative without providing too much information. Maria noticed that his hands were shaking as he gestured toward his guest ledger. The tourist facade that Maria had carefully maintained for 3 days disappeared instantly. Her mind shifted into tactical mode, automatically assessing threats, escape routes, and defensive positions. She quickly inventoried the resources available to her. No weapons, limited communication options, and a hotel full of innocent civilians who had no idea they might be in danger. The situation required careful observation before any action could be taken. From her hidden position, Maria studied the three men more carefully. The leader was approximately 40 years old, well-built, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His clothes were clean but practical, and he wore sturdy boots that suggested he was comfortable in mountain terrain. The man near the door was younger, perhaps in his late 20s, and seemed nervous. He kept glancing toward the street as if expecting someone or watching for threats. The third man, positioned to watch the stairs, appeared to be the most experienced. His movements were controlled and purposeful, and his eyes constantly scanned the hotel interior. The conversation at the front desk continued for several more minutes. Maria heard Carlos mention that most guests were out for the day and would return for dinner. The leader seemed particularly interested in this information and asked specific questions about dinner times and whether guests typically ate at the hotel or in town restaurants. Carlos explained that while the hotel served breakfast, most guests preferred to explore local restaurants for their evening meals. Maria realized she needed more information about what was happening in the town and whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger situation. Moving carefully to avoid creaking floorboards, she retrieved her small radio from her travel bag. It was a civilian model, not military equipment, but it could pick up local broadcasts and emergency frequencies. She put in earphones and quietly tuned through various stations, listening for news reports or emergency communications. What she heard confirmed her worst fears. A crackling news report from a regional station mentioned that armed groups had been spotted in several mountain towns, and authorities were investigating reports of kidnapping attempts targeting foreign tourists. The broadcast was brief and lacked detail, but it provided enough context for Maria to understand that San Miguel was not experiencing an isolated incident. This was part of a coordinated operation, and the men downstairs were likely part of a larger group with serious criminal intentions. The situation downstairs seemed to be concluding. Maria heard chairs moving and footsteps toward the door. She positioned herself to observe their departure while remaining hidden. The three men left the hotel, but instead of walking away, they stationed themselves at different points around the plaza where they could observe the hotel entrance. The leader took a position at a cafe across the street. The younger man moved to a bench near the church, and the third man positioned himself at the corner where the main road entered the plaza. Maria understood immediately that they were setting up surveillance and probably waiting for other guests to return. The hotel was being watched, and anyone entering or leaving would be observed and potentially targeted. She needed to warn the other guests and find a way to get everyone to safety, but first she had to determine how many people were currently in the hotel and what resources were available. Moving silently through the hallway, Maria listened at each door to determine which rooms were occupied. The American couple appeared to be in their room, as she could hear Dorothy's voice and the sound of running water, probably preparing for dinner. The German couple's room was quiet, but their hiking boots were outside the door, indicating they were inside resting. The Colombian families seemed to be gathered in one of the larger rooms, as she could hear children's voices and adult conversation in Spanish. Maria returned to her room and began preparing for what might become a very dangerous evening. She changed from her tourist dress into dark pants and a dark shirt that would make her less visible in low-light conditions. She gathered her few belongings into her small backpack, including her radio, a flashlight, and the emergency cash she always carried when traveling. Most importantly, she began developing a plan to protect the innocent people who had no idea they were now targets. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the plaza. Maria knew that nightfall would bring increased danger, as it would provide cover for whatever the armed group was planning. She had perhaps an hour of daylight left to warn the other guests and organize some kind of defensive strategy. The challenge was doing this without causing panic and without revealing her own military background unless absolutely necessary. Her peaceful vacation had ended abruptly, but Maria Santos was no longer playing the role of a simple tourist. The combat pilot was about to emerge from her civilian disguise, and the people in the Casa Montana Hotel were about to discover that their quiet fellow guest was their best hope for surviving whatever was coming next. The mission parameters were clear: protect innocent civilians, avoid engagement if possible, but be prepared for combat if necessary. Maria had faced armed rebels and drug cartel forces from the cockpit of a fighter jet. Now she would face them on the ground, armed with nothing but her training, her courage, and her determination to ensure that everyone in the hotel lived to see another sunrise. Maria knew she had to act quickly, but carefully. The three armed men positioned around the plaza were clearly waiting for something, and she suspected that other guests returning for dinner would trigger whatever operation they had planned. Her first priority was to quietly gather intelligence and warn the people currently in the hotel without creating panic or alerting the watchers outside. She decided to start with Carlos, the hotel owner, since he had been questioned by the men and would understand the gravity of the situation. Moving silently down the back staircase that hotel staff used to access the kitchen, Maria found Carlos in his small office behind the front desk. He was sitting with his head in his hands, clearly shaken by his earlier encounter with the armed men. When Maria appeared in his doorway, Carlos looked up with startled eyes. She could see immediately that he was frightened and struggling to process what had happened. Maria closed the office door quietly and sat across from him at his small desk. "Carlos, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said in a calm, steady voice that carried unmistakable authority. "Those men who questioned you are dangerous, and they're still watching the hotel. We need to protect your guests and your family." Carlos stared at her in confusion. The quiet tourist woman who had been staying in his hotel for 3 days was suddenly speaking with the confidence and directness of someone accustomed to handling crisis situations. Her entire demeanor had changed from the polite, somewhat reserved guest he had known to someone who clearly understood dangerous situations and knew how to respond to them. "I don't understand," Carlos whispered. "Who are you? What's happening to my town?" Maria made a quick decision. The situation was too serious for half-truths or continued deception. "My name is Maria Santos, and I'm a combat pilot with the Colombian Air Force. I'm here on vacation, but that doesn't matter now. What matters is that armed groups are targeting foreign tourists in mountain towns, and your hotel is being watched. We need to get everyone to safety before they make their move." The revelation hit Carlos like a physical blow. His quiet guest was a military officer, a combat pilot who flew dangerous missions against the very kind of people who were now threatening his hotel. The irony was overwhelming, but there was no time to process the implications. Carlos had spent his entire adult life running a peaceful guest house, treating visitors like family members, never imagining that his hospitality business would put innocent people in danger. "What do they want?" Carlos asked, his voice barely audible. Foreign tourists are valuable hostages, Maria explained bluntly. They can demand large ransoms from families back home, or use them as bargaining chips with governments. The remote location here makes it perfect for their purposes. They can take people and disappear into the mountains where it's almost impossible to track them. Maria quickly outlined what she had observed and what needed to happen immediately. Carlos would need to contact local authorities, but she suspected that help would be hours away, if it came at all. The town's small police force would be no match for an organized criminal group, and military or special forces units would need time to mobilize and reach the remote location. How many people are currently in the hotel? Maria asked. Carlos consulted his guest registry with shaking hands. The American couple, James and Dorothy Patterson, are in room 7. The German couple, Hans and Greta, are in room 5. The Colombian families are in rooms 3, 4, and 6. That's 12 people total, including 4 children. Plus my wife Elena is in the kitchen, and my daughter Sophia is upstairs doing laundry. Maria did quick calculations. 17 people total, including 4 children, against at least 3 armed men and possibly more. The hotel's layout provided some defensive advantages, as it had thick colonial walls and limited entry points, but it also created potential trap situations if the building was surrounded. Carlos, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. First, call the regional police and military commands. Tell them you have foreign tourists under threat from armed groups, and you need immediate assistance. Give them exact numbers and emphasize that there are children involved. Then, I need you to gather your wife and daughter and bring them to your office. Keep them here away from windows until I can secure the rest of the building. Carlos nodded and reached for his telephone, but Maria stopped him. One more thing. Do not tell anyone that I'm military unless it becomes absolutely necessary. If the situation allows, it's better for them to continue thinking I'm just another tourist who happens to know how to handle emergencies. While Carlos made his phone calls, Maria conducted a rapid reconnaissance of the hotel's layout and defensive possibilities. The building was constructed around a central courtyard, with guest rooms on 2 floors connected by a wooden staircase. The main entrance faced the plaza, but there was also a service entrance through the kitchen and a small door from Carlos's office that led to an alley behind the building. Windows on the plaza side were large and decorative, providing good views, but also making the interior visible from outside. Windows on the back and sides were smaller and higher, offering better protection. The hotel's construction was typical colonial style, with thick stone walls and heavy wooden doors. This would provide some protection against small arms fire, but the large front windows were vulnerable points. Maria began formulating defensive positions and escape routes, just as she would when planning combat missions over hostile territory. Carlos finished his phone calls and returned to where Maria was studying the building's layout. His face was grim. The regional police say they will send units, but it will be at least 2 hours, maybe 3 because of the mountain roads. The military command is mobilizing a special operations team, but they're even further away, 4 or 5 hours minimum. Maria had expected this. Remote mountain towns were always at a disadvantage when it came to emergency response times. The very isolation that made places like San Miguel attractive to tourists also made them vulnerable to criminal exploitation. We're on our own until help arrives, Maria said matter-of-factly. That means we need to be smart, stay calm, and work together. The most important thing is to avoid direct confrontation if possible. These men want to take hostages, not kill people, so if we can make it difficult and risky for them, they might decide to move on to easier targets. Elena appeared in the office doorway, drawn by the sound of intense conversation. Carlos's wife was a small, energetic woman who had spent her life caring for others, first raising her own children and then treating hotel guests like family. The sight of her husband's worried face and the presence of their guest Maria in what was clearly a serious discussion immediately alarmed her. "Carlos, what's happening?" Sophia said she saw men watching the hotel from the plaza. Carlos quickly explained the situation while Maria continued her tactical assessment. Elena's reaction was immediate and practical. Her first concern was for the children staying in the hotel, and her second was for all the guests who had trusted them to provide safe accommodation. Like her husband, she was struggling to process that their quiet guest was actually a military combat pilot. "What can we do to help?" Elena asked Maria directly. "Right now, I need you to prepare some supplies. Water, food that doesn't need cooking, flashlights, any first aid materials you have. Put everything in your office here, away from windows. If we have to move people quickly, we'll need supplies ready to go. Also, if you have any kind of radio or communication equipment besides the telephone, get that ready too." Sophia appeared in the doorway, her teenage curiosity overcoming her parents' instructions to stay away from windows. She was a bright girl who had grown up in the mountains and possessed the practical intelligence that comes from rural life. Unlike her parents, she seemed more excited than frightened by the sudden drama. "I saw the men you're talking about," Sophia reported. "There are more now. I counted 5 different ones around the plaza, and I think I saw others in the street behind the church. They're trying to look casual, but they're clearly watching our hotel." Maria felt a chill. If Sophia's count was accurate, they were facing a larger group than she had initially assessed. 5 men around the plaza, plus others in strategic positions, suggested a well-organized operation with significant resources. This was not a simple kidnapping attempt by local criminals. It was a sophisticated operation by a group with military-style planning capabilities. "Sophia, you did good work observing, but now I need you to stay away from windows completely. Can you do that for me?" The teenager nodded, but Maria could see she wanted to be more involved in whatever was happening. Teen bravery could be both an asset and a liability in dangerous situations. "Actually, Sophia, I do have an important job for you. I need you to go to each guest room and quietly let people know that we're having a security concern and they should stay in their rooms with doors locked until further notice. Don't mention armed men or kidnapping. Just say there's been some suspicious activity in town and we're being cautious. Can you do that without frightening them?" Sophia nodded eagerly and headed upstairs to deliver the messages. Maria hoped that the guests would accept the teenager's simple explanation without asking too many questions. Panic could be more dangerous than the actual threat, especially if it caused people to make poor decisions or try to leave the hotel at the wrong time. Maria returned her attention to the tactical situation. She moved to a position where she could observe the plaza without being seen from outside. The men Sophia had identified were still in position, but their posture had changed. Instead of casual surveillance, they now appeared to be preparing for action. The leader had moved closer to the hotel entrance, and the others had adjusted their positions to provide better coverage of potential escape routes. Even more concerning was the appearance of additional personnel that Sophia had mentioned. Maria could now see movement in areas that would allow the group to surround the hotel completely. This was definitely not a simple opportunistic crime. It was a coordinated operation that had been planned and rehearsed. Her radio crackled with a weak signal from a regional news station. The broadcaster reported that several mountain towns were experiencing security incidents involving foreign tourists, and authorities were investigating coordinated criminal activity. The report advised tourists to avoid remote areas and seek assistance from local authorities. Maria realized that San Miguel was part of a much larger operation targeting multiple locations simultaneously. This explained why police and military response would be delayed. Resources were being stretched across multiple incidents, and the criminals had planned their timing to maximize confusion and minimize effective response. It was a sophisticated strategy that suggested significant intelligence gathering and coordination capabilities. Sophia returned from delivering messages to the guests. "Everyone is staying in their rooms like you asked." The American man wanted to know more details, but his wife convinced him to follow instructions. The German couple seemed scared but cooperative. The Colombian families are keeping their children quiet and locked their doors. Maria nodded approvingly. Having everyone secure in their rooms eliminated variables and gave her better control over the situation. Now she needed to determine what the armed group was planning and when they intended to make their move. The answer came sooner than expected. Through her observation position, Maria saw the group leader speaking into what appeared to be a radio or mobile phone. After a brief conversation, he signaled to the other men around the plaza. Their movements immediately became more purposeful and coordinated. "They're getting ready to move," Maria announced to Carlos and his family. "Everyone into the office, away from windows. Lock the door behind you, and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Carlos hesitated. "What about you? What are you going to do?" Maria was already moving toward the front of the hotel, staying close to walls and out of sight from the windows. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do. Protect people and neutralize threats. Stay in the office, keep quiet, and trust me." As Carlos, Elena, and Sophia secured themselves in the office, Maria took position near the hotel's main entrance. She could hear movement on the wooden porch outside, and low voices speaking in Spanish with accents that confirmed her suspicion that these were not local criminals. The organized nature of their operation and their professional movements suggested they were part of a larger criminal network, possibly connected to drug trafficking organizations that had expanded into kidnapping operations. The door handle turned slowly, and Maria realized that her peaceful vacation was about to become the most important mission of her military career. Everything she had learned about combat, tactics, and survival was about to be tested not in the cockpit of a fighter jet, but on the ground, face to face with armed criminals who threatened innocent people under her protection. The quiet tourist was gone completely now. Combat pilot Maria Santos was about to show these criminals that they had made a serious mistake when they chose to target the Casa Montana Hotel. The hotel's front door opened slowly, and Maria watched from her concealed position as 3 armed men entered the lobby. They moved with the practiced coordination of people who had done this before, immediately spreading out to control the space and secure potential escape routes. The leader carried a pistol openly, while the other 2 had weapons concealed, but ready. Their confidence was obvious. They expected no resistance from a small mountain hotel full of tourists. Maria remained perfectly still, observing their movements and listening to their quiet communications. They spoke in Spanish with accents that confirmed they were not local to this region. Their tactical movements and coordination suggested military or paramilitary training, which meant they would be more dangerous, but also more predictable than common criminals. The leader gestured toward the front desk and said something to his companions about finding the guest registry. One man moved toward the reception area, while another positioned himself to watch the staircase leading to guest rooms. Their plan was clearly to identify target rooms and round up foreign guests systematically. This was the moment Maria had been preparing for since she first realized the hotel was being watched. Every instinct developed through years of combat flying told her to strike now, while she had the advantage of surprise and position. But the presence of innocent civilians, including children, in the rooms above demanded a different approach. Any confrontation had to be carefully controlled to avoid endangering the people she was trying to protect. Maria made her move with the silent precision of someone trained in close combat situations. Moving from her concealed position, she approached the man, searching the reception desk from behind. Her hand covered his mouth before he could cry out, and she applied pressure to specific nerve points that rendered him unconscious within seconds. His weapon was secured, and he was quickly dragged behind the front desk, out of sight from his companions. The leader and the 3rd man were focused on examining the guest registry and planning their room-by-room operation. They hadn't noticed the disappearance of their companion yet, but Maria knew she had only minutes before they would realize something was wrong. She moved toward the man watching the staircase, using the hotel's colonial architecture to her advantage. The thick walls and decorative columns provided cover, allowing her to approach undetected. This man was more alert than his companion had been, and Maria had to wait for the right moment when his attention was focused on sounds from upstairs. The opportunity came when one of the Colombian children in the upper rooms began crying, probably frightened by the tension and unusual quiet in the hotel. As the armed man turned his head toward the sound, Maria struck. This time the confrontation was more difficult. The man partially turned as she approached, and there was a brief struggle before she managed to subdue him. His weapon was secured, but the noise of the confrontation had alerted the leader. Maria heard rapid footsteps and urgent Spanish calling for his companions. The element of surprise was gone, and the situation was about to become much more dangerous. The leader now knew that someone in the hotel was actively resisting their operation, and his response would be more aggressive and potentially violent. "Quien está ahí?" the leader shouted, demanding to know who was there. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to intimidating people into compliance. When no answer came, he began moving systematically through the hotel lobby, weapon raised and ready. Maria had positioned herself where she could observe his movements while remaining concealed. She could see that he was experienced in combat situations. His movement patterns and weapon handling showed professional training. This was not going to be a simple confrontation with a common criminal, but a tactical engagement with someone who understood combat dynamics. The leader discovered his unconscious companion behind the front desk and immediately understood that he was facing organized resistance. His posture shifted to full combat readiness, and he began speaking rapidly into a radio, clearly calling for backup from the other members of his group positioned around town. Maria realized that she had perhaps minutes before the hotel would be surrounded by additional armed men. The situation required immediate escalation to prevent the operation from becoming a prolonged siege with hostages trapped in their rooms. Moving quickly but silently, Maria positioned herself where she could confront the leader directly. Years of combat flying had taught her that sometimes the best defense was aggressive offense, and that decisive action could prevent situations from escalating into prolonged, dangerous confrontations. "Drop your weapon and leave immediately," Maria commanded in Spanish, stepping into view with the captured pistol trained on the leader. Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in life and death situations. The leader spun toward her voice, his own weapon coming up, but stopped when he saw that she had him covered. For several seconds, they faced each other across the hotel lobby in a tense standoff. Maria could see him evaluating the situation, trying to understand how his carefully planned operation had gone wrong so quickly. "You are not a tourist," he said finally, studying Maria's stance and the professional way she held her weapon. "No, I'm not," Maria replied calmly. "I'm someone who protects innocent people from criminals like you. You have two choices. Leave now while you still can, or face the consequences of threatening civilians under my protection." The leader's radio crackled with voices from his team outside, asking for status updates and reporting their positions around the hotel. Maria could hear that they were getting impatient and concerned about the lack of communication from inside the building. "My men have this place surrounded," the leader said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Even if you manage to surprise us here, you cannot fight all of us. It will be better for everyone if you surrender now." Maria smiled grimly. "I've faced worse odds than this from the cockpit of a fighter jet, flying missions over territory controlled by people just like you. Do you really think a few criminals with pistols are going to intimidate me?" The leader's eyes widened as he processed this information. The revelation that he was facing a military pilot, someone with extensive combat experience, clearly changed his assessment of the situation. His confident demeanor began to show cracks of uncertainty. "You're military," he said, and it was not a question. "Colombian Air Force, combat pilot. And right now, you and your men are threatening Colombian civilians and foreign guests under my protection. That makes you enemy combatants, and I am authorized to use whatever force necessary to neutralize the threat you represent. Maria's radio, still tuned to regional frequencies, suddenly came alive with official military communications. Units were being scrambled to respond to the multiple tourist kidnapping incidents, and she could hear call signs and coordinates being transmitted as forces mobilized across the region. The leader heard this too, and Maria saw his tactical calculations changing rapidly. What had seemed like a simple kidnapping operation in a remote location was becoming a confrontation with military personnel, with official forces converging on the area. The risk-reward analysis no longer favored continuing the operation. This doesn't have to end with violence, Maria continued, maintaining her tactical advantage while offering a path to de-escalation. You and your men can withdraw now, disappear into the mountains, and avoid what's coming. Military special forces are en route, and when they arrive, your options become much more limited. The standoff continued for several more tense minutes. Maria could hear movement outside the hotel as the leader's men repositioned in response to radio communications. She also heard something else, the distant sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountain valleys. "Do you hear that?" Maria asked. "That's Colombian Air Force helicopters bringing Special Forces troops. Your window for withdrawal is closing rapidly." The leader's radio erupted with urgent messages from his team. They had apparently spotted the approaching helicopters and were reporting that their escape routes were being compromised. The carefully planned operation was falling apart, and the leader had to make immediate decisions about cutting losses and withdrawing. Maria maintained her defensive position while listening to the increasingly frantic radio communications from outside. She could tell that the criminal organization's command structure was beginning to break down under the pressure of unexpected military response. This was exactly what she had hoped for. The threat neutralized without civilian casualties or extended confrontation. The hotel's front door opened again, and one of the leader's men called out urgent warnings about approaching aircraft. Maria could now clearly hear multiple helicopters converging on the town, and the sound of heavy vehicles on the mountain roads indicated that ground forces were also approaching. The leader made his decision. Speaking rapidly into his radio, he issued withdrawal orders to his team. Then, backing toward the door while keeping his weapon trained on Maria, he began his retreat. "This is not over," he said. "We will remember this location and return when conditions are better." "No, you won't," Maria replied firmly, "because now this location is known to military intelligence, and it will be monitored and protected. Find another line of work, because if you continue targeting innocent civilians, you will face the full response capability of the Colombian military." The leader reached the door and disappeared into the plaza, shouting orders to his men as they rapidly withdrew from their positions around the hotel. Maria maintained her defensive posture until she was certain they had truly departed, then quickly secured the weapons left by the two men she had subdued. Outside, she could hear the sound of vehicles starting and driving rapidly away from the town center. The criminal team was clearly abandoning their operation and evacuating the area as quickly as possible. The approaching helicopters had convinced them that the situation was no longer salvageable. Carlos, Elena, and Sofia emerged from their office as the immediate danger passed. They looked at Maria with expressions of amazement, gratitude, and complete bewilderment. The quiet tourist who had spent 3 peaceful days in their hotel had just single-handedly defeated an armed criminal group and saved everyone in the building. "You can tell the guests it's safe to come out now," Maria said to Sofia, who hurried upstairs to deliver the news. "But ask everyone to stay inside until the authorities arrive and can confirm the area is secure." Carlos sat down heavily in a lobby chair, overwhelmed by what had just happened in his peaceful hotel. "I still cannot believe it," he said. 3 days you were here, eating breakfast with other guests, visiting our museum, buying souvenirs from Carmen at the market. How was I supposed to know you were a combat pilot who could fight off armed criminals? Elena hujid Maria impulsively. You saved our guests, our daughter, our business, maybe our lives. How do we thank someone for something like that? Before Maria could answer, the first Colombian Air Force helicopter appeared over the plaza, circling to assess the situation before landing. Maria recognized the aircraft type and knew that Special Forces troops would be fast roping down within minutes to secure the area and ensure no threats remained. She walked outside to signal the helicopter crew, using standard military hand signals to indicate that the immediate area was secure and civilians were safe. The sight of a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes giving professional military signals from the hotel entrance must have confused the aircrew, but they responded appropriately to her communications. As the helicopter settled into the plaza and Special Forces soldiers deployed to secure the perimeter, Maria reflected on how dramatically her peaceful vacation had changed. 3 days earlier, she had been looking forward to anonymity, relaxation, and escape from the constant stress of military responsibilities. Now, she was coordinating with combat troops and preparing to brief military intelligence officers about a sophisticated criminal operation. The first person off the helicopter was a major she recognized from Air Force headquarters. His expression showed surprise and confusion as he approached Maria, clearly trying to understand why a combat pilot was standing in front of a small mountain hotel directing military operations. "Major Santos," he said, saluting formally. "We received reports of criminal activity targeting tourists, but no one mentioned that we had military personnel on site." "I was here on vacation, sir," Maria replied, returning the salute. The situation developed rapidly, and I had to respond to protect civilian lives. Over the next several hours, Maria briefed arriving intelligence officers about everything she had observed and experienced. The criminal organization had clearly been planning a major coordinated operation targeting foreign tourists across multiple mountain towns simultaneously. Her resistance at the Casa Montana Hotel had disrupted their plans and provided valuable intelligence about their capabilities and methods. The other guests gradually emerged from their rooms as soldiers confirmed the hotel and surrounding area were secure. James and Dorothy Patterson approached Maria with expressions of amazement and gratitude. The American couple had heard enough through their room door to understand that their fellow guest had somehow saved them from a dangerous situation. "We thought you were just a nice lady on vacation," Dorothy said. "We had no idea we were sharing breakfast with a hero." The German couple, Hans and Greta, were equally astonished. They had spent the previous day hiking with Maria, discussing tourist destinations and comparing travel experiences, never suspecting her true profession. The Colombian families with children expressed overwhelming gratitude that their vacation had not become a nightmare due to Maria's intervention. As evening fell over San Miguel, the plaza filled with military vehicles and personnel conducting security sweeps and intelligence gathering operations. The quiet mountain town had become temporarily transformed into a military staging area, but the immediate threat had passed. Carlos and Elena insisted that Maria remain as their guest for as long as needed, refusing any payment and treating her like family. Sophia had already begun spreading the story throughout the town about how the quiet tourist lady had turned out to be a combat pilot who single-handedly defeated the criminals threatening their community. Maria knew that her identity as a military officer was no longer secret, and her peaceful vacation was definitively over. But as she watched the hotel guests and local families going about their evening routines, safe and secure thanks to her intervention, she felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with successful combat missions or military commendations. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not in the sky over hostile territory, but on the ground, protecting innocent people who had no idea they were in danger. Sometimes heroes wore civilian clothes and carried tourist maps instead of military uniforms and sophisticated weapons. And sometimes the greatest victories were measured not in enemy targets destroyed, but in lives protected and civilians kept safe. The woman the criminals had dismissed as an easy target had turned out to be their worst nightmare, a highly trained combat veteran who would risk everything to protect innocent people. Their assumptions about the harmless tourist had been deadly wrong, and the people of San Miguel would remember for years how appearances could be deceiving when someone with courage and training decided to stand up against those who threatened the defenseless. Maria Santos had come to the mountains seeking peace and anonymity. Instead, she had found her most important mission, proving that heroes don't always announce themselves, but they always answer the call when innocent lives are at stake.